Good afternoon all. In the off chance that I'm not there, you may be watching this video. And I'm going to talk a little bit about what happens in sections 2.6 and 2.7 of our geometry book. Now, what's interesting about 2.6 is I have disseminated it amongst the other sections. Because in this chapter, in this section of the chapter, it focuses on two-column proofs and what is a proof and other questions that we've already asked several times. What is curious here is there are two different theorems in here which relate to something we talked about in our last class. So one thing that we do see is that these two theorems talk about the reflexive, the symmetric, and the transitive properties. These are the three properties that we talked about in regards to equality. So these belong to equivalence relations. And all we need to do for these theorems would be to show it also applies for congruence. Right? And in fact, section 2.5 stated these. So what we mean by that, so for theorem 1, let's take theorem 1, and theorem 2 is very similar. So theorem 1 here, my trackpad is a little strange, could be written like this. So that segment congruence is reflexive, means if you have a segment, it is congruent to itself. So for example, a generic segment AB is congruent to itself. That it's symmetric, I might have two segments congruent to each other. Right, for instance, we might have AB is congruent to CD. Sorry for that little jump in the screen, I had some technical difficulties. But the symmetric property implies that this could be written as CD is congruent to AB. So just, you can switch the order. And then the transitive property would say, well, if I have AB is congruent to CD, and I have CD is congruent to some other line segment, for instance, EW, this transitive property implies AB is congruent to EW. Now, in order to prove this, you have to do that thing that we talked about, where you have sort of a world of congruence, and this is another universe indicating equality, and you change everything that's congruent into things that are equal. So, for instance, I can change all these line segments that are congruent into segments of equal length, since, if AB is congruent to CD, then you can say that the lengths are equal. And then do all my work down here with the equal sign. So things like switching the order for the symmetric, or putting them together for the transitive. And then once I get my result, I then use the definition of congruent segments once more and put it back into congruence. And so that's a sort of proof which relies heavily on moving things into the equal sense. And we did some with that when we considered adding angles and things like that. So that's a move that's very common. For the sake of this video, I'm not going to go into details of that. Now, the other things that you'll see, if I were there, we would also do, well, we would focus on 2.7 since 2.6 is more or less covered, but not explicitly, but implicitly throughout the other sections. In 2.7, we have a handful of theorems, which are all pretty obvious, really, but how to prove them might be interesting. So the first one, for instance, theorem 3, in your book, it does give you a proof of this, so I would say look at that. But what does it say? It says all right angles are congruent. The proof is very straightforward. If 1 and 2 are right angles, then 1 and 2 are 90 degrees, so they're equal in measure. Well, therefore they're congruent. That's sometimes obvious, but it is a line of reasoning, and so it's good to be explicit about all these details, because later on it will help us so much to be able to pay attention to what we are doing and know that all our steps are reasoned out. So you would invoke the definition of right angles. That proof is in the book. We are going to do a proof here, but I'm going to prove theorem 6 with you. Theorem 4 and 5 are very, very similar. Theorem 4 just says that if I have, say, angle 1 and angle 2 add up to 180. Oops. These angles 2s are hard to go. Angle 1 and angle 2, great. So they add up to 180. They could be next to each other, they don't have to be. But then if angle 2 and, say, angle 3 also add up to 180, then angle 1 and 3 are the same. That's theorem 4, right? So it says if two angles are supplements of the same, so 1 to 2 or 3 to 2, if they're both supplements of angle 2, then they're congruent to each other. Again, some of that might be obvious, but it's helpful to work it out in the details. Again, you would just invoke definitions of supplementary. And maybe I'll make another video sort of go into detail of these. Theorem 5 is exactly the same, except we're going to add to 90 instead of 180. If I have these two angles in a line, for instance A and B, these angles add up to 180, right? Add up to 180 degrees. That's what this postulate is really saying, postulate 12. If two angles form a linear pair, then they are supplementary. So that was sort of a quick coverage of things that we can prove, and that will be something we do as exercises. But I want to do a proof with you, theorem 6. Vertical angles are congruent. Something interesting about vertical angles is a lot of the time students make this assumption that vertical angles are by definition congruent, but they're not. By definition, they're angles that share the same vertex that are non-adjacent, or they're formed by two opposite rays, is a better way of saying it. So let's draw it out. If I have this setup, then angle 1 and angle 2 are known as vertical angles. Now to prove they're congruent, I'm going to include angle 3 in here as well. Let's do a two-column proof. So given angle 1 and angle 2 are vertical angles, so I'll often just use VA to stand for that, are vertical angles, we need to prove angle 1 is congruent to angle 2. Alright, here are my steps. I'm going to start out by putting in my statements and my reasons. So a nice S, a nice fancy R. I might use a straight line. So this is a two-column proof that we're going to make. So the first step you almost always do is your given. In this case, I'm going to write it, angle 1 and angle 2 are vertical angles. Although that is something where you don't always have to write it down when it's given in the diagram. But I like that habit, so I'm going to write it here. It cannot hurt a fly. Okay. And then my next step will be to say that angles 1 and 3 add up to 180 degrees. The reason I know that is by that postulate 12. If two angles form a linear pair, they are supplementary, which by definition says they add up to 180. So over here, I might either cite postulate 12, I'm having a hard time writing that, slash maybe definition of supplementary. Let me zoom in and write this out. Okay, so I just added the rest of the steps because my tablet is being terrible. So we just did step number 2, definition of supplementary. The next thing I would have to do is say, well, since angles 1 and 3 add up to 180, likewise angles 2 and 3, so they add up to the same number, so they're equal to each other. That's called substitution, or you might call it the transitive property of equality. So that's how I get to this statement in step number 3. But notice the measure of angle 3 shows up in both these equations, so I'm going to use the subtraction property of equality. I know I am so sorry that this looks so bad. Again, this tablet. But that gives us left over when we subtract it out. Measure of angle 1 is equal to measure of angle 2. So remember how I was talking about being in the universe of equality? That's really where we're at. We're in the universe of equality right now. But what I want to prove is that they're congruent. So I have to go back to the universe of congruence, and to do that I will cite the definition of angle congruence, or of congruent angles. And then that gives me exactly what I wanted to prove, that vertical angles are congruent. Great, so there's two real ways you might use this. So often you'll come across diagrams sort of like this. Now, if you're given different measurements throughout, so say, on one hand you're given stuff like whatever, x plus or x plus 7, and then over next you're given y, down here you're given 2x, and then you're given whatever else you want on the other angle, 3y minus, there's going to be a real number there, z, whatever. Okay, so in all this stuff you might have just a question that says find x. So what's x? So if I tried to use x plus 7 with y adds up to 180 and going around like that, I might run across something eventually. Sometimes I have to do it that way, but what I want to take advantage of is that the angles opposite each other, these vertical angles, are congruent. So all I would need to do is ignore the rest of it if I'm going for x, and in this case just say, oh yeah, 2x is equal to x plus 7. And I can find x is equal to 7 pretty quickly there. Now, that's sort of a rule of thumb. I could have also been given something a little bit different, where, say you gave me x, y, which are opposite. Oh my goodness. X and y, and then on next to it maybe I have, say, 3x. If I need to find x or y, I could notice these two are next to each other. Maybe I can say here, I could actually find all these. It would be a pain in the butt to say x is equal to y because they're vertical angles. That would be true. You could go that way. But what's often good with these sorts of problems is to look for what variables show up where. So these two adjacent angles both have x in them. So that makes this a likely candidate to not even focus on the vertical angles here, but instead say x plus 3x is equal to 180, because if I have fewer variables in my equation, that will almost always make it easier. So in this case I would have 4x 4x is equal to 180, and I would very quickly have x is equal to 45. Then likewise I can use that information to say, well, since x is equal to y from vertical angles, then I know y is also 45. And since z would be equal to 3x being vertical angles, 45 times 3 is the beautiful 135. So I can find out all that information, but the keystone is normally to find an equation involving the same variable. Alright, go ahead and get started on the homeworks.